I got one more story, and it's actually an uplifting and a positive one. And I have to thank the wonderful,
Yay!
yeah,
Such a rarity.
yeah. At least I think it's going to be positive. I have to thank the beautiful, wonderful, and terrific Sema Hernandez for sharing this one. I found this in the 9/9 morning edition of leftists.today and Independent Left News. Headline: DeSmog blog, and this is also an excellent environmental reporting site. Indigenous resistance instrumental in stopping high-profile fossil fuel projects, says report. So, what we're talking about is Line 3, Line 5, Keystone. The protectors of the land are actually protecting the land. And they've kept enormous volumes of carbon pollution out of the atmosphere already. So, a little bit of positive news amidst all the craziness that we're dealing with all the time. But
Yep.
certainly want to acknowledge the efforts of indigenous peoples in North America have helped block or delay a long list of major fossil fuel projects over the past decades, successfully leading to the avoidance of a massive amount of greenhouse gas emissions, according to a new report. The numbers don't lie. Indigenous peoples have long led the fight to protect Mother Earth. Dallas Goldtooth. Awesome. Love him. A Keep It in the Ground organizer for the Indigenous Environmental Network. He's actually been on Katie Halper's show a couple of times. The report was co-authored.
I also saw something that Harvard did recently with regards to fossil fuels and stuff. If anyone saw that article, I'll try to find that for you, Indy.
Cool.
I saw that one recently.
So the report was co-authored by IEN and Oil Change International, a research and advocacy organization focused on transitioning away from fossil fuels. So will it be biased? I don't know, but certainly they have reason to want to look into this. But what they're going to find, Indigenous resistance against carbon. This is a great website. Wow, really. Well done. Wonder who made this. I'll have to look into this. IEN. I think I've actually shared articles from this website before. So, indigenous resistance has been key in blocking at least 8 major pipeline projects, including Keystone, the 20 billion Canadian Tech Frontier tar sands mine in Alberta, the Jordan Cove LNG project in Oregon, drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Awesome. Taken together, those delayed and canceled projects would have been responsible for nearly 800 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, or about 12% of the total emissions of the U.S. and Canada in 2019. That's a stunning amount.
Yep.
Another half dozen projects are currently contested, including Line 3, the Coastal Gas Link pipeline, the Rio Grande LNG in Texas. These projects represent another 12% of total U.S. and Canadian emissions, which, if opponents have their way, would bring the total carbon pollution avoided due to indigenous resistance to 1.6 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent. The pollution from 400 coal-fired power plants. Now, that doesn't mean that we should create 400 new coal-fired power plants. I want to be clear about that.
Yeah, but what if they're clean coal?
345 million
What if they're clean coal?
passenger vehicles? Yeah. Well, again, that would only offset all of the things that all the indigenous people have done, and
Yep.
we don't want to ruin their hard work.
No.
Dallas Goldtooth, by the way, is also a stand-up comedian, and he was a writer and co-producer, I believe, on the FX show about the reservation, living on the reservation recently. Indigenous peoples continue to exert social and moral authority. The topic for today, we've had a couple different topics for today. We've covered about a half dozen news stories. This is the last one. This is about the indigenous peoples' resistance being instrumental in stopping fossil fuel projects. So some positive news about how the indigenous people of America or of North America are helping to save our environment. Again, one of the prominent leader, LeDuc, who's this? Winona LeDuc. Yeah, I spent a lot of my life fighting stupid projects. It's like one unbelievably bad idea after another. Says Winona LeDuc. Winona LeDuc. I don't want to mess up her name. She's phenomenal. Program director of Honor the Earth. Over many years, she's fought to protect both the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota, where she lives, and other Native American communities from a slew of dirty projects, including coal mines, coal-fired power plants, incinerators, and other nuclear waste facilities. She is currently one of the most prominent leaders in the fight against the Line 3 pipeline. Stop Line 3. Please stop Line 3. It's transporting dirty Canadian tar sands to our refineries for processing, for export, just like they had done with Keystone. It is the most pollutant. It is terrible for the ground, and it is almost guaranteed to leak at some point, likely in Minnesota and likely on indigenous land. They don't have another place to go. This is where they live. Fossil fuel projects on native lands often violate the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. Again, this is United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, a global resolution adopted by 144 nations in 2007. Only 4 countries opposed the declaration. Go figure. We're one of them.
Yep.
Years later, all 4 holdouts
of course
changed
we
their
are.
position and announced their support for UN DRIP, but the support has been mostly rhetorical, lacking the force of law at the national level. You know, Mark Charles has spoken so eloquently about this. He spoke about this at the U.S. Solutions Summit. I know he's spoken at this on KRTD media interviews, as well as interviews on Hardlands Media. Wanted to give a shout out to Kit Cabello and Hardlands. But decision making for large fossil fuel projects on indigenous lands still often takes the form merely of consultation, a check-the-box procedure that governments impose on indigenous communities rather than conducting a process that require their affirmative consent before moving forward. And of course, affirmative consent also means compensation. And they're probably not going to give consent in the first place because, for example, DAPL. And they're going to talk about the disconnect between professed support for UN DRIP and how decisions are made in practice was DAPL, which crossed treaty territories for the Oceti-Sakowin people. In 2015, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe passed a resolution opposing the pipeline project due to the oil pipeline's threat to water treaty rights and sacred cultural sites, including areas in what is now North Dakota. This is, I mean, we all know what happened up at Standing Rock.
Yeah.
But just for anybody who doesn't know, it was the water protectors. Again, that was the indigenous peoples were the water protectors, and the cops essentially turned the water cannons on the water protectors, and were working on behalf of the corporations. It's like a bunch of old cronies up here acting like they own the world, and there's a bunch of us saying, no, you don't, and we're going to keep fighting you. We're going to keep fighting you guys, and I love her for it. Both the IEA and UN International Government Panel on Climate Change have argued that a rapid phase out of fossil fuels is necessary to avoid catastrophic warming of global temperatures. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't pay attention to that, right? New fossil fuel projects should therefore be off the table. 100% agree. On September 3rd, several progressive members of Congress traveled to Minnesota. A day later, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was headlining a public event for the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, where he was interrupted by activists opposing Line 3. Felicity tried to tamp down the outburst. Governor Walz, you can't hide. Line 3 is genocide. Love it. On September 7th, Biden visited New York to highlight the destructive damage of the floods. And they tell us this is Code Red. But again, they've been silent on line 3. They did not renew the Keystone XL thing, which is great, but long way to go. So again, DeSmog blog, Nick Cunningham, independent journalist, covers oil and gas. He's been featured all over the place on independent sites that cover the industry. So he's an expert about, and he's, I believe, also Indigenous himself. So he speaks from experience, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong. I just made that up.